Actually, it was through Craigslist.
Mm-hmm.
So I had just come over to Montreal after graduating with my education degree and undergrad. And so I was looking for anything that I could find at that point, and I came across Cafetalk, and I was like, oh, okay, well, it was sort of in like a backup plan at first,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, because I was looking for work, in the public system. But eventually, it just so happened that I didn't get work in the public system until I was very much doing well on Cafe Talk. And
Mm-hmm.
at that point, I weighed the pros and cons, and I was thinking I'd rather work online. You know what I mean? It's such a flexible way of working, and there's a lot less politics to deal with. Not online. I had one-on-one, of course, in person back in Vancouver, and I did the whole public system.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as tutoring goes, it was always face-to-face. But online is is actually a lot easier in ways
Okay.
because first of all, nobody has to travel,
No,
but
that's true.
second of all, you can actually take notes, and that's obviously something that a lot of my students know me for, which is I actually transcribe live the
Mm-hmm.
whole lesson almost, and you can't do that when you're face to face. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of notes that can get taken, or a lot of like written. There's a written record of everything that we talk about. That's really helpful for both the tutor and or the teacher and the student. I think the only thing that was a point of worry, I guess, was sometimes the online connection, and that's
Mm-hmm.
more of a technical thing. Do you know what I mean? Because there's certain times where maybe a student might have poor connection, and then you're sort of afraid that they're going to think it's your connection or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess I was a little bit nervous for my first or second time, but that wasn't because of the online thing. It was just the nature of starting a new job. Most of the time, it has never gotten that bad. However, if there is a little bit of choppiness, I usually do the usual, like, let's try turning your video off. So that's the first thing I'll do is I'll get the student to turn their video off, and then I'll still let them see me. If that still doesn't work, we just do the voice call. That usually will clear up. Most of the time, that clears up a lot. And for myself, I'll usually make sure all of my other devices are off. And I'll also ask my students to make sure they're not downloading anything. So just a lot of those technical things both sides need to know. Like if they have like certain pages open, sometimes like pop-ups will take up a lot of the data. But most of the time I haven't had a lot of trouble, and maybe there were once or twice where it was so bad we had to cancel it. But I don't even remember. I think at that point that student was taking lessons with me every single day anyways, so we just kind of said, okay, let's just continue tomorrow.
Okay.
It was really intuitive. Like it was so easy to do. I mean, like everything was spelt out for you, and I was really impressed. The first thing that impressed me was how fast Cafe Talk responded, because in fact, now that it triggers my memory, because there was actually another site. I'm not going to mention the name, obviously, but they took forever, and it was so unprofessional. And so the fact that Cafe Talk got back to me, they say that they're going to do it within 48 hours, but I got a message back within 24. And the whole thing where they make sure step by step you know what you're doing. Like they walk you through it. You guys walk us through it, and like I love the notifications because you guys do 12 hours or 24 hours before, and then 2 hours before. So that way, I mean, it's so easy because you don't have to worry about forgetting. I was like, I wrote it down because I didn't know that was going to happen, but I got the email notifications, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I was actually taken by the way Cafe Talk dealt with tutors right away, because like I said, the experience I had beforehand was so impersonal. So I liked that a lot. The interview was, it started off like any other interview. There might be a little bit of questions, on your background, but honestly, I feel like the interview was more of a supportive type of interview. Like I remember it was Mihoko that interviewed me, and she was just teaching me how to use the site for most of the time. So it's not even as if they're like harshly judging you about anything. She was like taking me through the site, telling me how it works. She was giving me tips along the way. So in fact, it was a lot more of a supportive interview that I've ever had before. Like I've gone through a lot of interviews just for various different jobs or teaching positions, and this one was, I don't think anybody has anything to worry about. I'm going to admit it was sort of a struggle at first, but for me, I was on top of, okay, what's not working? Because for me, if something's not working, I kind of try to figure it out right away. So there was one thing, of course, there's going to be a couple of people who will book you right away because you're new, you know, they want to know what's happening with this new tutor. And I figured out for me, what my most popular first lesson was the Pinterest one. And I quickly realized that lesson, the way I had set it up at that point, did not allow for a student to want to continue it, not because it wasn't a good lesson, but because it felt like there was no build-up. Okay. So that's one of the main things that somebody else, I don't even remember who it was now, but I utilized the Facebook tutor group because everybody's pretty helpful to each other. And I was like, hey, how do you guys do this? And I think it was James who said at the end of the lesson, like put down goal for next class. Yeah, so that really worked. Like as soon as I was like, oh, okay, that actually works. So now if you see my lesson reviews, like you'll see goal for next class. We're going to catch up. We're going to do review of something that we learned last time. And then we're going to build on that. And something that really works is something that some educators call circle teaching. So what it is like you say they learn a phrase in one lesson. It could be a Pinterest lesson. That phrase that you then ask them a question, right? Using that phrase, and you apply that phrase to different situations, and you circle teach. So what it means is you keep reusing it. So the next class you keep reusing it, because when students just read a definition, even when you're learning a new language, you know, like you can't remember it unless you do that. So if you make the student understand that you're there for them on this journey, like I'm going to make sure that you learn and remember what we did last class, that actually makes them want to come back. And that has worked most of the time. Repeated students, I think I was lucky enough that I had a few. There's the first one I remember are two. Okay, I had 2 repeating students within the first 3 months, but again, that was only like 2 of them, right? So of course, for the first 6 months, I would say, I was still like, oh, you know, like, am I going to be able to make enough money? And I'm going to be honest, it's hard. For the first year, you're like, okay, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. And I actually reached out to other veteran tutors, and someone told me second year is when you're really going to feel like a steady flow of income. My expectations were, like I said, it started off as a backup. It was like my fallback plan. And I don't think I expected to be able to make, teachers in general, let's just be honest, teachers in general aren't like the most rich. It's not their most rich profession, but I was actually surprised that I was able to make as much as a teacher, almost as much as a teacher working in the full-time public system. And although for me now I've cut down my hours because I don't actually need that much income at this point, that's one thing that I didn't expect. I didn't expect to be able to pull in, you know, an income that was probably even more than substitute teachers. Because substituting, I don't know if you know what it's like, but
I can imagine.
Hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Like you're just waiting for calls and stuff like that. So that was one thing that was unexpected. I didn't expect that I would want to stay for the long run. I thought it was just going to be a temporary thing. But I don't want to leave.
That's great.
Yeah, because there's other platforms out there, and like I said, eventually I got calls from other places in the public system and elsewhere. But in the end, in the second year when I got comfortable with Cafetalk, I turned the other opportunities down. In fact, so I love online jobs. Well, I don't know if I mentioned it already, but the flexibility is amazing. there's for me also, it's a personality thing. I know some people wouldn't like it, but if you are more of a one-on-one person, who doesn't necessarily like going out that much, it's really good for that. And it's just, I find it so much more flexible because, for example, like some students, for example, can't make it back home in time and they just stop by at a coffee shop and then they wait for me to call them there. Mm-hmm. So that type of flexibility is amazing for me. And if we're gonna talk about practicality, like I don't have to spend $100-something on a bus pass.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
Like you save a lot of transportation money too, and because like online it's so flexible, like there's a lot of, I don't know, it's easy to connect with a lot of different people. Whereas if it were face to face, yeah, you might get 100% of like what they're paying you, but all that travel time is not worth it to me. It's just so convenient in so many ways. There's a couple of things. Obviously, everyone knows about coupons. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that really helped me was exposing myself a lot on the tutors column. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I did a lot of videos in the beginning, and I had a lot of students tell me, oh, because I watched your videos, I already feel like I know you, so they're less shy. So it's like the more you expose yourself and be yourself too, because I know sometimes because the students are already so tense, if the tutor is also tense, it just makes it awkward for both sides. So kind of be a little bit, especially because most of us are in the West anyway, so it's not out of our culture to be a little bit more open. And I think the more you can expose yourself and expose kind of who you really are and what you really think about things, people can tell when mm-hmm. you're being genuine. And I think that's something that is definitely a plus factor for you. And I highly suggest putting videos up. And I know some people don't want to be on YouTube, but not a lot of people will come across your videos anyways on YouTube if you don't tag them, and they're only basically for Cafetalk students. So people like that. People like being able to see you talk. So that helped a lot. Most of the time, I will generally attract people who are a little bit more advanced. So that is something that people have to think about. Like if you don't have any Japanese, target intermediate to advanced. Okay, and you also, it's really helpful to know your basics of grammar, and that might seem like a given, but in fact it's not, because I know some people here are very casual tutors and it's a conversational thing, but you have to know your basic parts of speech, because if you do, because most Japanese students will have learned that. And so if you can build up really simple sentences with them, they will feel like they're making a lot of progress, even if it's like, I took the apple there. Like if you have a good base of what you're doing with them, even with your more beginner students, just start at that level, because maybe to the tutor you might feel like, oh, but this is so simple, but it might not be for the student, especially that word order, right? Like mm-hmm. Japanese word order. Do you speak Japanese?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So you know it's like completely different.
Yeah.
So, but if they feel more comfortable, it is easier just to target intermediate and above, because there are plenty of students at that level on Cafetalk, and you might as well just let the beginners go flock toward people who speak Japanese. Actually, not everybody uses lesson plans, but I do. Mm-hmm. If you do, it's easy. It's easier that way to like have a general target, and then from there, you can play around with what the student actually needs. So because I actually did train as a teacher, like I'm a certified teacher, so when you're going through that program, like the teaching program, they tell you that being prepared is like the most important thing, and it's true. So for lesson plans, I plan out every minute, and if I don't know if any other Cafetalk staff has shown you my lesson plans, but I do suggest that you write down your objectives on top, like mm-hmm. what do I want the student to know. So on top you have your objectives, and you actually have the timestamps, mm-hmm. like, okay, we're going to talk about this for the first 5 minutes, next 5 minutes, etc. So preparation and having a clear view of what you want, where you want to take that student during that lesson. And I think that's really important, because I think the fact that Cafetalk gives you that freedom is awesome. But I will say too, there's a flip side to it, because sometimes there's so many ideas and you're like, but which one should I go with? You know what I mean? So it is sort of like there's two sides to it, but how am I going to answer this? Like, it gives you less pressure. Mm-hmm. Because there's so much freedom, and I didn't ever feel like somebody was evaluating me, and maybe that might freak some people out, because I know that there are people who are like, I need to know like what I'm supposed to do. But for me personally, my experience was like, when I don't feel like people are watching over me, that's the way that's how I grow the most, without pressure. And that's not for everyone though. Like during my practicum, I was really cracking because I felt like my main teacher was always there, and she was really cool. She wasn't giving me pressure at all, but because she already had her own set of rules, I didn't know how to implement my own authority to the kids. But I told her that, and she laid off. She gave me the reins 100%, and that's where I personally thrived the most. So for somebody who likes to explore and experiment without somebody breathing down their neck, I think that's really, really good. And if somebody has trouble with that, then I think, Cafetalk has been really helpful for the times that people are lost. Cafetalk has helped me, like they've guided me in the right direction. And with the freedom also comes, like I said, too many ideas sometimes. So one thing, I don't remember who it was, but somebody from Cafetalk told me, like, on your lesson list, like, don't put too many choices. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you have too many choices, people get confused. So for me, it was a gradual process of realizing, okay, which lessons are really hitting home with people, and I just got rid of ones that weren't getting they weren't getting requested that much. And it also made it easier for myself, because then I had fewer different lessons to plan. Do you know what I mean? So that's something. It's like, it's really important to be in tune to your own rhythm, right? Because you might have somebody's idea here, somebody's idea there, but eventually, most of the time when you do your own thing, you're going to realize, okay, I do have a certain rhythm. So you have to be true to that, but then leave a little bit of room for flexibility. So you have the backbone, but then you can sway a little bit according to what your students need. And if it's not a match, most of the time it's okay. If there's a student who doesn't book you again because it's not a match, you might be a little bit depressed, but in the end, what I notice is, in the end, I'd rather attract students where we mutually want to be talking to each other, because it just makes the lesson go by so much faster, and it's so elastic, right? Like there are constantly new students coming on, so every student that you lose, there's going to be a better match for you. Because I know that really helped, just like being way more focused and being like remembering to slow down. Mm-hmm. Right now, I don't have to slow down like when I talk too much, because eventually students are so familiar with the way I talk that I might talk slower in the beginning, like the first 2-3 classes, but they don't even notice when I start talking at super speed. But I just encourage them. I'm like, did you notice I'm talking at super speed and you still understand?